Hi, my name is Trevor Baierl. I'm making a documentary about creutzfeldt-jakob disease.
The first time that I heard of CJD was in July of 2010.
It was in October of 2011.
December of 2000.
July 17th, 2012. The day of the diagnosis. The day of the diagnosis.
Prion diseases, or transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, are a family of diseases that affect the brain, and they can occur among animals and humans. In humans, the most common prion disease is creutzfeldt-jakob disease.
Creutzfeldt-jakob disease, or CJD, is a neurodegenerative brain disease. The speed and cruelty at which it kills is especially hard on the families because there is not much information readily available. In April of 2013, my mom died from CJD about 3 months after she was diagnosed. From her hospital bed, she asked me to fight for her. But I quickly realized that this is not just her fight or my fight, but a fight for all the families that have suffered the loss of a loved one to the ravages of CJD. This is why I'm telling my story.
So, Mom, I'm gonna post this because there's people all over the world that love you. Because you're such a sweet person and so many people care about you. And you're an inspiration, okay? I love you.
Hi, Trevor. It's Mom. We're at the campground at the Dunes in Orange County. We'll be here through Saturday. Gary knows what the schedule is more than I do, and with the kids and where we're going to be and everything. So give me a call when you have a chance. Love you. Bye.
Mary Sue Riffle was born in 1945 in Niles, Michigan. She was the fifth of 7 girls. When she was 4 years old, her parents bought their first house. It had 1 bathroom. After graduating high school, she moved to Milwaukee and got a job with Allstate Insurance. That is where she met my dad. They were married in 1965. They had 2 sons, my older brother Gary and myself. Unfortunately, my parents divorced in 1991. She remarried in 1994 and became a grandmother in 1998. These voicemails are the last memories of my mom before this cruel disease began to steal away everything that we take for granted. She was on a cross-country RV trip, visiting all of her grandkids. She felt and looked good. She returned home to Florida. It was September when she started feeling off. The doctors began a series of tests, but they couldn't come up with any answers.
CJD can be difficult to diagnose, especially in the earlier stages of the disease. It can mimic other diseases, such as Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, or any number of other dementing disorders, because dementia is one of the primary symptoms of the illness.
Depending where it starts, it can look like a lot of other diseases. It can look like other neurodegenerative diseases. It can look like Alzheimer's. It can look like toxic diseases. It can look like MS. It can look like aphasia or language disorders. It can look like Parkinson's disease and related neurodegenerative diseases. So I call it the great mimicker because of that. It can look like so many other diseases, which sometimes makes the diagnosis pretty difficult.
She didn't tell me things were happening because she was concerned about me at work and then going to visit my dad for Thanksgiving and stuff. So it wasn't until after Thanksgiving that she told me she was now using a walker. And at that point, you know, my brother had known for a little bit, and so we talked about going to visit her, you know, for Christmas or whatever, and we're discouraged from doing that. Then January, she went for testing. A few weeks after that, when things started coming back. So February happened when we finally made our trip. And at that point, she was using a walker, but she needed help doing that.
Look at you go all by yourself.
In January, he quit working. His job kind of let him go. He is a parts manager, lots of parts numbers. He started forgetting the parts. One of the girls we know that does parts too, she called for a carburetor kit, something. And when he come back on the phone, he talked to her about something totally different. So John's always a practical joker, so she thought he was jacking with him, but he couldn't remember. So they let him go, you know, they let him go. So he laid on the couch and he kept saying, my feet and legs are killing me. My feet and legs are killing me.
In 2010, a mysterious thing was going on in my family where my mom had just gotten, like, rapidly ill. And the symptoms at the beginning of that year were just sort of a mixed bag of seemingly minor things. Her vision was blurry. She was a little bit more forgetful than usual. She got into, like, a sort of weird car crash where there seemed to be just sort of like a bad judgment call that no one could explain.
We had the relationship where we would talk on the phone pretty much daily, sometimes multiple times a day, depending on how busy we were. And she was just telling me about, you know, some doctor's appointments that she had and how she had to go in for an MRI because she had been falling a lot. And she was concerned about, you know, what direction her health was going in.
It starts out with someone coming home from work and they drive back by their house and they've forgotten where their house was, and they end up in, you know, another neighborhood and been lost. And it's just sort of out of the blue. They didn't have any other problems. And then we see this is just completely, day by day, this keeps getting worse. They have memory problems. They start having, you know, it's problems dealing with numbers, calculating, doing some of those things. Daily routines and things that they used to do all the time, they're starting to have trouble doing.
Her behavior was changing slightly. We were noticing small differences in the way that she was acting. I remember her doctors getting in touch with us, meaning me and my brothers, and telling us about that they suspect that she had a disease called CJD.
Why should you care about a disease you've never heard of? Have you heard of Alzheimer's? Have you heard of Parkinson's, ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease? These are all diseases similar to CJD, but with a much longer life expectancy. Breakthroughs in research in any of these diseases result in breakthroughs for all of them.
At first, in March, they thought he had Parkinson's disease. So I couldn't get any answers from the doctors around here. I'm not shy. I kept saying, we're gonna find this, John. We're gonna find out what's wrong. So I called the Parkinson's Disease Foundation, and I got hooked up with a specialist that specializes in that. So when she was the one that diagnosed John with CJD, and you stop and think, my gosh, how did it go from his feet and legs hurting and him walking to his head, you know, to a fatal brain disease? So that was shocking.
Want me to help? I think I can probably read it. Let's see. Happy Valentine's Day. I miss you, Grandma. I hope you get better soon. I love you, Ken, with lots of hugs and kisses. Oh, P.S. I got straight A's in my second quarter.
Good.
He got straight A's and he wanted you to know.
They don't know. There's so many doctors that just don't know because they've never seen it before. And so you deal with that.
In a patient with a suspected Prion disease diagnosis, they could have several key symptoms. One would be ataxia, which is a muscular incoordination. Myoclonus, which consists of involuntary jerking, and vision changes, which can manifest in several different ways. And of course, one of the key symptoms that is almost universal in these patients is dementia.
Happy Valentine's. I love you, Grandma. I miss you, and I wish I could be there right now. Good luck, best wishes, and I'll see you soon. Love, Joe. Hugs and kisses.
On the basis of all of this, she was taken to a neurologist, especially as her sort of like forgetfulness and confusion increased. And they didn't really know what was going on. Many things were sort of like tested for. She got a spinal tap done on the suspicion that maybe this was an early stage Prion disease. It came back negative for the 1433 biomarker of Prion disease. They ruled it out, kept searching for other things.
There are certain ways we can make the diagnosis clinically of diseases like CJD. The EEG can sometimes show very specific abnormalities at the brainwave test. And then certain spinal fluid tests as well can also, there are certain proteins that might be elevated. And then the MRI, in many cases of CJD, in most cases, it will show very specific abnormalities.
Yeah.
There's more variability in the genetic forms. Not all genetic forms will have abnormalities. And we don't know when they begin, but we think that the abnormalities on MRI in most cases begin very early in the disease, possibly even before the first obvious symptoms.
Right.
Hi, Gary. I hope you can hear me. I love you. I hope you're having a good time in California. Not too good. I have Trevor laughing at everything I say. Here's to you.
Nobody thinks it's CJD. It's just not what you think of. You think of everything else before you come to that conclusion. It's kind of what my mom went through, where they tested for everything. They thought it was going to be, they figured it was cancer because of the things that were happening and what they were reading in tests, but they couldn't find any cancer and they couldn't find anything else wrong with her.
CJD becomes a diagnosis of elimination. So we really have to rule out every other disease that is more common than CJD before we can even really come to that conclusion or thought that this is a prion disease. So that means you've gone through multiple tests. They're all coming back negative, or they're coming back normal, and nothing's wrong with you.
I still think she needs music. Music motivates people. I should have brought my Zuma.
You know what got her going yesterday was that Coke.
I know. I said, yeah, I'm going to get me some Coke. I'm going to fix her some Coke, too. We're going to fix some Coke.
When she had that Coke.
She did. She was on that sugar high.
She was on that sugar high.
I don't remember that.
Well, I don't ever see you eating sugar, so to speak, so.
You don't?
No. Drinking that Coke just really made you energetic.
Yes.
And if it wasn't on my grandfather's death certificate, I don't know how long it would have taken them to say, maybe it's CJD.
This is such a complicated disease. It has no relevancy to what we know as human beings. It's not cancer. It's not AIDS. It's not a disease that has been explored and taken apart and put back together again. This is a disease that every time you come up with answers, it morphs into something else.
What are you having trouble doing that you really want to do?
I want to walk.
Yeah.
I want to ride a bike.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I hope to do it soon.
Yeah.
Yes.
Her spirit was strong throughout, and she kept even saying, I just want to walk again. I want to walk again.
So I gotta go home today. You know that, right?
Goodbye.
That's all you're gonna say? Goodbye?
Well, you could stay here.
I know, but I have to go home for a little bit.
Why?
Gotta go to work.
Yeah, I gotta go take care of Reese. Go back to work for a little bit, but I'm gonna come back.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yes. As long as you come back.
I'll come back.
Okay.
What are you gonna do while I'm gone?
Sleep.
You're gonna sleep? You're gonna rest?
Yes.
Exercise?
Exercise.
Yeah. Because what do you want to do?
Walk.
Yeah.
Walk.
When I learned that she likely had CJD, I made the decision to take 2 months off of work, family medical leave, to be there for her. And that's when we went to Baltimore. As soon as I took off work, we went to Baltimore, scheduled a visit with Dr. Brian Appleby. This was CJD that he studied at Johns Hopkins. That was his focus area. So, you know, things started to go downhill pretty rapidly after that.
The progression of these diseases is a hockey stick. They start off really very, very slowly, probably early on, and we really don't even know for sure when they start or how to detect them at that stage. And then they reach a certain stage where they really do begin to turn up like the hockey stick. And the rapidity, the slant on that hockey stick varies from the disease to disease. So you're going along very slowly like this, and then all of a sudden somebody says, oh, that looks kind of weird. And so in prion diseases, it kind of goes up like that when you see it. In Alzheimer's disease, however, it kind of goes up a bit more like that. And then Parkinson's disease is probably even a little bit lower. But they all go up.
Her decline was just so rapid that by March, she was like too confused to really carry on a conversation properly. By May, she wasn't really talking coherently at all. And she had lost so much muscle mass that she couldn't stand or walk, she couldn't balance.
At the end of disease, there is this progression towards what they call an akinetic mutism. And so this is where the body just doesn't move. It's like there's not a will to move the body. And the person's alert, it's not in a coma, they're alert, but they can't speak.
You gonna smile pretty for me? You got a smile for me? Yeah. How's my mom? How's my mom? You wanna say hi to Gary? It was told to me about my mom having CJD that she's gonna have these crazy mood swings, hallucinations. So she may just sort of act out and do things, and she may act out more towards people she loves. I was preparing for these moments of my mom not acting like herself, because she's a very caring, loving person. And especially as she got older, she would not yell or curse you out or anything. So, and the way that I was told to deal with it is to just be calm and talk to them. Don't give in to, you know, don't react to it. So my mom's yelling at me, and I'm just saying, it's okay, Mom. I love you. You know, it'll be okay. I love you. And she stared me dead in the eye and yelled at me, well, I don't love you. And it was not her. There was just, I would never hear that from her on her worst day. She was the one who made me say over the phone, I love you, before hanging up. Honestly, since she did that and going through all this, it's changed that I do that now with family members and people. It's because you don't want to not tell them when they know about it, when they're cognitive and can understand it. You don't want to be just saying it when they're no longer here. But that moment was just, it was literally like somebody had taken over her body and was making her speak and say these things and yell.
They can be verbal hallucinations or sounds, but they usually are a visual type thing where they're seeing someone who's not there, or they're even seeing objects that aren't there or aren't seen by anyone else. And those can occur early on.
It made me think of how many times did somebody have some sort of dementia like that, or CJD, and went through an exorcism or something like that, because they're screaming these things out, and the weird physical twitches and things that happen with this, it honestly seemed like like the disease was maybe a demon or something, and it took over, and now you have a possession, you know, and a way to explain what was happening to her in terms that people can understand. Because if you go, she had these involuntary twitches and, you know, bodies, and she's yelling stuff at you, that's one thing. But if you explain it like she was possessed, people have a vision of what that is. They can understand that. So that sort of encompassed what I was seeing.
So I watched the very rapid decline over those several weeks of her losing the ability to walk on her own, take care of herself, you know, go to the bathroom and prepare her own food. And eventually it led to, you know, she was no longer able to speak anymore in the very end.
The bad news about this disease is that it's always fatal, usually within 1 year. What we found is that almost 80% of cases die within 1 year, almost half of those within 6 months. We do have outliers that may survive a little bit over a year or even longer in some familial cases, but the end result, unfortunately, is always the same.
You can't say the wrong thing to a family. You can't say, oh, they're gonna die. That's why we're fortunate that we have people like Brian Appleby or Jim Law or Michael Geschwind who know and are wonderful human beings and sympathetic and empathetic in every way.
When we give somebody a diagnosis of prion disease, we don't want to be wrong because we're giving somebody a death sentence because we have no treatments, no cures.
By the time we knew what my mom had and started figuring out where's a place that does research on this, and there's so few, to get her to any of those places was impossible because she couldn't really travel. So to actually research it, most of the research happens after somebody's dead, and you have to do an autopsy and do the biopsy on the brain and send it off to the places that will study it.
The only way to confirm diagnosis for prion diseases is by a whole brain autopsy. And to do the whole brain autopsy, we have to get permission by the family, and it has to be their choice to do it. And it's a difficult choice to make.
If the suspicion is CJD or a prion disease, then we, at the appropriate time, we have to time it very carefully, we'll talk to the family about autopsy. The importance of autopsy. First of all, for the family, they need to get clarification and to know, yes, this definitely was CJD or GSS or VPF, whatever. And from that, they do the DNA. Was there a marker? Is there a mutation, rather? Sometimes that mutation, the patient is the index case. There could have been a family history that no one knew. And there's no way to find that out unless there's an autopsy.
My grandfather died in 1976. Somehow his doctor was convinced that it was CJD. And this is just hearsay, because obviously I was too young to remember any of this. I have no recollection of my grandfather. But my dad did take care of him for a while. And the story is that my grandfather drove himself to the hospital, so he was physically capable, he was just not mentally capable. And the doctors refused to do an autopsy because the brain biopsy in the autopsy is the only way you can confirm CJD, but they were too afraid because it's also one way you can transfer it.
CJD can exist in 3 forms: sporadic, familial, and acquired. The first form, sporadic, appears to occur spontaneously. The familial form is genetic in nature and can be passed down from generation to generation. Finally, the acquired form of CJD would include iatrogenic CJD, for example, something that could be passed through a neurosurgical procedure. And that category would also include variant CJD, which has been shown to be transmitted through ingestion of beef contaminated with bovine spongiform encephalopathy. Autopsy itself can be very useful not only to confirm the disease, but also to identify a subtype. The most notable example would be variant CJD versus sporadic CJD. Patients with variant CJD have a very unique brain analysis compared to sporadic CJD patients, and then you can distinguish one patient from the other based on that analysis.
Getting back to my grandfather, they were too afraid. They were too afraid to study it, didn't want to touch him, but the doctor was so convinced that it was CJD that he did put it on the death certificate. I don't know why this doctor in 1976 said, yes, CJD. It's kind of unbelievable.
The CJD Foundation is another very valuable organization.
We, first and foremost, are patient family support. That is our biggest role. We drop everything if we get a call on the helpline.
CJD Foundation was a great support for me and my family.
The helpline is available 24/7. Amazingly, there's only 3 of us volunteering after hours to answer the calls. Those messages come directly to my cell phone, to Lori's cell phone, and also to our main office, so we don't miss those. And we work with the families the best way we can. I mean, we hold their hand. This is what we do, and I think we're good at it. We can offer second opinion referrals, and we have a list of physicians who are our angels, and truly will see a referral from us the next day. They'll work their schedule inside out to do that.
Florence was there for me. A specific memory that comes to mind is when we were planning my mom's funeral arrangements at the funeral home. They learned about the disease that my mom passed away from, and they said that she couldn't have an open casket funeral.
So often when families call us, they can't even put the words together. They don't understand what's happening. They've never heard of this disease. They can't even say the words. So you kind of have to pull them back from the ledge.
So I was on the phone with Florence, and she helped me to coordinate the entire process, and within hours, the funeral home said, "We're sorry about that. You can have an open casket funeral for your mom." And I just was really grateful for her support in that moment, which was a very difficult time for us.
This helpline really is a connector, and those of us who answer the calls have walked the walk. We know what families are experiencing, and because of that, we can be helpful and effective.
Once my mom passed and we confirmed familial CJD, I knew I had to help in any way I could. I'd been in touch with the University of California at San Francisco when we hoped to get my mom to see some Prion disease specialists. They do full clinical research testing for people at high risk of Prion disease. I rushed to get an appointment as soon as possible and made sure it was okay to bring my camera with me to document as much as I could. I wanted to share as much as I could with the rest of my family.
There's no measure of hope. There's no diagnosis, no treatment, no cure. We need research. We need to get some answers.
So yeah, I'm going to UCSF Tuesday. I have to be there at 7 a.m. All right, so I'm at UCSF Memory and Aging Center.
All right, so we're gonna go over the consent forms for the study today. We're gonna start out by just talking a little bit about the research more generally and what we're looking for. So Dr. Michael Geschwind has been the primary investigator on this study. He's been doing studies on human prion disease and CJD for the past 15 years or so.
They have information on my mom already, but they want everyone in the family to do it so they can kind of see, because then they still don't know what they're looking for. They have ideas, but they don't know what they're looking for. So if they can get everyone in the family, they might be able to get an idea of like, oh, look at all these things that we never thought of that are the same. Or
look at these things that we didn't think of, and my mom had this that was different from the rest of us. And that's why nobody else has developed CJD, and she did.
The current grant that we're working on is called Early Diagnosis of Human Prion Disease. And so what we're looking for, as I'm sure you're aware of, is the earliest signs of change in people who have prion disease or people who have the genetic mutation that causes genetic prion disease. Currently, there aren't a whole lot of good ways to diagnose CJD, and as you have experience with, people are often quite sick by the time they get a correct diagnosis. So we're especially interested in looking at people who are at risk for a genetic prion disease, who know they have the mutation, and then we also do see people who are symptomatic both for genetic and sporadic prion disease. And we're mainly looking for uprated and downregulated proteins in the spinal fluid or blood, changes on MRI, and any other changes we might be able to see through the tests that we do over the next 2 days.
2 days of testing. Basically, what I'm realizing is it's all the testing that my mom went through when they were trying to figure out what was wrong with her, because they're going to do CT, MRI, spinal tap, and other stuff, and then blood test, and the blood test is is the genetic test, but that takes weeks. But the other stuff, they basically just get a basis of like what my brain is doing and what my body's like.
Right after this, you'll be having a brain MRI. The strength of the magnet is 3 Tesla. And what that means is usually if you had an MRI in a hospital, it'd be 1.5 Tesla. So this is a much stronger magnet. The other MRI that you won't be having is 7 Tesla, so it's even stronger than that. That's just a research MRI. There are very few 3 Tesla machines around the country and maybe a handful of 7 Tesla machines.
The brain scan can show the deterioration, because essentially what the CJD does is it creates holes in your brain. Basically the big breakthrough that this UCSF professor and won the Nobel Prize for, Stanley Prusiner, he developed the Prion theory. Prion is a protein that has changed. So the proteins in your brain are all doing their thing, and suddenly one decides, no, you know what, I'm going to fold the other way. And then the rest of all the other ones start folding the other way.
You have a couple of normal proteins that look like this. They're going around. They have a 3-dimensional structure that's really important to what they do. And then perhaps spontaneously, perhaps otherwise, one of these proteins goes bad and it goes to a form that no longer functions and can cause some damage. Now, that happens in prion diseases, and it happens in other diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease.
These proteins can fold in an incorrect manner, and for whatever reason, that misfolded protein causes other proteins to misfold as well. And so they continue to accumulate, and this process of accumulation leads to a deterioration of the brain, essentially.
For the last 25 or 30 years, we've known in prion diseases, a protein like this, it goes bad, it meets a normal protein and causes it to go bad. And then those two go off and meet another normal protein and cause another one to go bad, and you get a chain reaction going on. And that's a very important difference in how this is happening. And it makes a big difference in how you might approach dealing with the disease.
From my understanding, and again, I'm going to learn a lot more when I go up there and they're going to explain things to me, but depending on where it starts, it'll affect how your body responds to it. So if it starts in the memory area of your brain, you're going to lose your memory first. If it happens in motor functions, you're not going to be able to walk and do things. If it starts with sight, you may not be able to see. You know, it just depends on where in the brain the holes begin, because then the brain can't function where the holes are. It seems pretty simple in theory. The question is, why do the proteins decide to change into prions and become something different? And how do you stop them from doing it?
Either this evening or tomorrow morning, depending on their schedule, you'll have an EEG. Have you ever had one of those before?
I'm actually not sure if I
So
have.
that's the one where they put kind of this sandy glue on an electrode, and they glue them to your scalp, and then they kind of wrap them up so they stay in place.
Right.
And then you sit there for about an hour and a half, and they're measuring the electrical activity of your brain. So one of the things that is an indicator of CJD in some people is kind of these slow, sharp waves. That usually only happens toward the end of the disease course in people who are already sick, but we get an EEG on anybody who comes in again, just looking for any change at all.
Sure.
Then a little later today, you'll have some neuropsychological and cognitive testing with my coworker Sven, who you'll meet in a little bit. That basically is a series of questions. Some of them will be very easy, some of them will be a lot more challenging.
What season is it right now?
Summer.
And what is...
Or baseball season.
Yes, exactly. My favorite season.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to kind of get a baseline of where you're at cognitively right now.
Okay.
Like I mentioned, there'll be a blood draw. That'll be when we get to the hospital later this afternoon.
Yeah.
We'll be taking about 10 small tubes of blood. It looks like a lot more blood than it is. It actually isn't that much blood, but it does look like quite a bit.
Yeah.
The purpose of that blood, so 3 tubes go to our research. So we store them for kind of later research.
Sure.
2 tubes go to the National Prion Disease Center, and that's where they do the genetic testing.
They will do the same blood tests that my mom did, that we found out that she had the genetic marker, the mutation. They can do that test and not tell me. Obviously, it's up to me whether or not I want to know. And they discourage people from learning, because it can, either way, it can affect you. Started with an MRI. Next is cognitive testing.
Where are we right now?
In general, it's University, California, San Francisco. I believe we're at the Memory and Aging Center.
Great. What floor of the building are we on right now?
We're on the first floor.
And what city are we in?
In San Francisco. So far, everyone's great. This is what you would go through, and they'd be looking for stuff if I was symptomatic at this point, but I'm not. Don't even know that I have it.
What is this?
That is a pen.
And what is this?
That is a watch.
I'm gonna say a phrase and I want you to just repeat it back to me, okay? No ifs, ands, or buts.
No if, ands, or buts.
I want you to take this piece of paper in your right hand, fold it in half, and place it on the table. Great. And can you read this and do what it says?
Close your eyes.
And you can open them.
Can you read this? I can't see a thing. Can you read it now? I can't see a thing. I'll bet you can read it now.
If you look inside my mind, you're gonna find a lot of useless cartoon references. I don't know why I have these things stored in my memory, but I do. I can remember the names of Seinfeld characters better than people I meet. So when the cognitive tests focused on my short-term memory, it becomes nerve-wracking. But I can't begin to imagine what it's like for a dementia patient to feel like every moment is a test like this.
So now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna read a list of words to you. and I'm going to read it to you several times. And after each time that I read it to you, I want you to tell me as many words as you can from the list. And don't worry about what order they're in, just try to get as many as you can, okay? So, truck, spinach, giraffe, bookcase, onion, motorcycle, cabinet, zebra, subway, lamp, celery, cow, desk, boat, squirrel, cabbage. Go ahead.
Cabbage, boat, horse, onion, spinach, cabinet, desk, that damn swallow keeps packing. Yeah, that's probably what I'm good for right now.
Okay.
After rewatching this test, I remembered a video I took of my mom. She struggled with seemingly easy questions and even began to guess when I pushed her. Who did I have lunch with today?
Who did you have lunch with today?
Did I have lunch with your sisters today?
Yes,
Which ones?
Helen and Barbara.
No.
Helen and Pat.
Well, Pat was there.
Pat.
Because Pat lives here, right?
Pat lives in Illinois.
No, Pat lives in Florida.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, she lives in your house. Not where you live, but you own the house that she lives in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And did another sister come down to visit you?
Barbara and Helen and Judy. I think that's all.
Didn't one of your younger sisters come to visit?
Girl Wendy. Yes, Wendy.
No.
Kay?
Kay.
Well, Kay came down to
Yeah.
visit me, yes.
She knew all of her sisters' names, but she couldn't remember who visited her the day before. She knew I was taping her and quizzing her, so she put up a brave front, but it had to be terrifying. I was scared trying to remember random objects from a list. This was her life. You've had enough. Okay. We'll say bye to Gary.
Bye, Gary.
Okay.
It's nice talking to you.
Yeah. It's definitely official. I'm in the hospital. I waited for my next round of tests, but I didn't have the anxiety of waiting for a doctor to tell me what was wrong with me. Still, I couldn't help but think of my mother. What did she think when she went through this?
Hey, Mr. Baierl.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. I'm Dr. Raquel Gardner.
Okay.
Touch my finger with your index finger and touch your nose. Go back to my finger.
The physical tests reminded me of the videos I saw of patients diagnosed with CJD, except I could touch the doctor's finger and then my nose.
Fist. Side of the hand. Can you do that sometime?
I was watching the video of the doctor test my motor skills and began to think that no one would be interested in this. That was until I saw a Parkinson's patient go through the same test in a documentary. That's when it hit me. Take the dementia of Alzheimer's and loss of motor skills in Parkinson's, and you start to understand CJD.
In prion diseases, we've known for a long time that the diseases can move from cell to cell. Researchers have found that the proteins that go bad in Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease, They're not prion proteins, they're different proteins. But when they misfold and go rogue, as I sometimes say, it turns out that they can travel from cell to cell. This overlap can be extremely helpful in understanding more about prion disease, but also more about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And for the Alzheimer's and Parkinson's people, it gives a new way for them to look at that disease. So this mutual interaction is really good.
It was time to sit down with Dr. Geschwin for my in-depth lesson on prion diseases.
Human prion diseases, we tend to divide them into 3 types based on sort of how they occur. And the most common form is the spontaneous form, which we call sporadic CJD. And then the next most common are hereditary familial forms, which are about 10 to 15% of all cases. And then far less than 1% are acquired. The most common ones that people might know about today are variant CJD that people have gotten from exposure to BSE or mad cow disease. And the incidence of prion diseases are about 1 per million per year. So in a country like the US with over 300 million people, we would expect more than 300 cases per year. And we get that. We get anywhere from 250 to 400 a year, and it varies from year to year. There's just this natural variation. That incidence is across the entire age population, from infants up to the very elderly.
The statistics are 1 case per million per population worldwide. We don't believe that. We feel there's many more cases, that some cases are not diagnosed. Some patients are misdiagnosed, or families, there's no diagnosis. Then families look up symptoms online, and it could be post-mortem. Call us and say, I know this is what my loved one died of. So it's important to really get those statistics. And the CDC keeps the numbers. They go off of death certificates.
Looking at the death certificates is a pretty good source of information about what's going on in the country in any given year. Of course, it's not 100% complete because some patients may not have CJD written on their death certificate, and so we supplement with other sources. And what we found is that we've added a few cases year after year from data that we receive from other sources, most notably the National Prion Disease Pathology Surveillance Center.
Every country that has prion diseases has a surveillance center. And ours is located at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And it is working under or with the Centers for Disease Control. They are funded from Congress.
There's more prion disease than the numbers suggest. There's a lot of people who die who's, it's a horrifying process. It's a horrifying disease course and way to lose somebody. And not every family wants to have an autopsy, wants to pursue a diagnosis after that point.
The surveillance of this disease is critical. We need to know what's happening here.
Prion diseases can look really different from one another. And so it's not a clean sort of like bucket of symptoms. It's not a trivial thing to diagnose.
Because the prion diseases don't occur equally across the age spectrum, a person's lifetime risk of dying from CJD is much higher than the incidence of 1 per million per year.
Wait, what did he just say?
A person's lifetime risk of dying from CJD is much higher than the incidence of 1 per million per year. So if I looked at an individual and say, what's their lifetime risk of getting CJD, it's much higher than the incidence of 1.1 per million per year. So, and the way we calculate a person's lifetime risk is we look at deaths from CJD per year over total deaths. And that's how we sort of make that type of calculation. We estimate that a person's risk of dying from CJD is about 1 in 10,000. Maybe 1 in 60,000 is a rough estimate.
The disease is 100% fatal and usually kills within a year. So 250 to 400 cases per year also equal about 250 to 400 deaths per year in the United States.
Of course, that number will fluctuate somewhat. In some years, we may see more than 400 cases. In other years, we may see less than 300.
According to the CDC's statistics, less than 2.5 million deaths occur each year. Since everyone dies at some point, and 250 to 400 will die from prion diseases each year in the United States, the complicated math is simplified. Because we are talking about an untreatable and incurable disease, 1 in a million doesn't hold up.
It is still a rare disease, there's no question about that. But if you look at a person's lifetime risk of dying from CJD, that 1 in a million doesn't really help.
My attitude, having gone through the year of my mom's illness, was these things are just too rare. Like, no one cares. There aren't even doctors who know about this.
If you don't have a loved one that experiences a random sounding disease, what's your incentive to learn about it?
I mean, there are a lot of bad ways to die, but my mom was 52. We had no idea what was going on. And I didn't know a lot of people who could relate to that. And then to be put in this like genetic testing situation was like, I think a lot of people didn't know how to think about it. They were looking at me and saying, but you're healthy, and like, everything seems like it's fine.
We'll talk a little bit about the genetics now. Yeah. So genes are part of your chromosomes. You get one part of the chromosome from your mom and one part from your father. And the chromosome is comprised of strands of DNA, very tightly wound DNA. These pieces of DNA has thousands of genes in it, and the gene encodes a protein. The shape of a protein really plays a major role in how that protein functions. Most proteins fold, and they fold into a very specific shape, and that shape determines their function. And if that shape isn't correct, that protein won't work right. Or maybe not only won't it work right, it might actually cause harm. Right. In sporadic disease, we think this is a spontaneous event. And in genetic forms of prion disease, there's an error in the gene, a mutation or an error, that makes this protein more susceptible to misfolding. Here's a model of where one parent is affected with a mutation, right. Prion disease, genetic forms of prion disease. So each child is 50% at risk.
The CJD mutation is a dominant gene, like brown hair or freckles. I have both. So I have a 50-50 chance of receiving the mutation because we know my mom carried it.
There are more than probably 40 mutations that are known to cause genetic prion disease.
It felt like a lot of odds were stacked against us because these diseases are so rare in the first place. Like, even looking at all prion diseases, not just FFI, like 1 person per million per year was not, it didn't rise to the level where this was like a strongly suspected diagnosis for my mom. So then it turns out to be prion disease. The odds of it being genetic, given that diagnosis, were like 10%, we think. So then it turns out to be genetic, and then my odds of having inherited the disease allele, 50%. And then it turns out that I did. So throughout the whole chain, it just felt like our luck was just incalculably bad.
If we find a mutation, we can say that with pretty high assurance, that person will die of CJD before they're going to die of something else.
Right.
There are those people who want to tell us that, you know, this isn't such a big deal. I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. None of us knows what's going to happen to us. And I'm not that fond of that. I don't think we should make light of the fact that, you know, having this mutation versus not having it is like a 30-year difference in life expectancy. That's kind of a big deal, you know? So, yeah.
And I'm not less likely to get hit by a bus tomorrow because I have this genetic mutation. Those risks are all still the same for me, too. Yeah. So it's not like I made some like bargain with the devil where I'm immune to everything else and then I'm gonna die of this disease when I'm 50. Like, that's not a thing.
Sitting with Dr. Geschwin in the consultation, I had to really think about, again, what do I want to know? Do I want to know whether or not I carry the mutation or not?
In terms of getting the genetic test, there are benefits and limitations to genetic testing. We discourage people from getting their own genetic results until they're absolutely sure. Because once you get that result, you can never take that back. Sure. Right now, there's no treatment or prevention. We don't know of anything that can definitively treat or prevent it. And so at this point, I usually like to ask people what they want.
I find more reasons to find out than I do to not find out.
What would be the negatives for finding out?
Well, then there's that fear of knowing what's going to happen if I do have it.
Mm-hmm.
I know this sounds silly and stupid, but literally all my life, since I knew that my grandfather died from CJD, and the little bit that I knew about it, I just thought of it as this disease that eats away at your brain. I just had a feeling that was how I was going to go. It's just been a weird thing, and I've said it, and I've made jokes about it and all these things, but I've always felt it. And I really didn't understand the genetics. At that point, I thought it was maybe something that can skip generations or what. I didn't quite understand. So that's the tough part. So then there's also, how does it affect my brother, being the only sibling? What does that mean if I do or don't? Is that, because it really doesn't matter. It's a 50-50 chance either way. It doesn't matter.
It does not matter.
So, there's...
Psychologically, it might.
It does, yeah. It does in your own mind,
but his actual
it really
risk
doesn't, yeah.
Right.
So, it's just a matter of thinking about all these things, but I'm a person that likes to know. I mean, obviously, I ask a lot of questions. I like to know. I've moved away from my small town and went to go do what I want to do. I chase things down. I don't run from them. So that feels like the way to go, is to find out. Like I said, I almost feel like I already know that I have it. So I guess in a weird way, it could almost be a bigger relief to find out that I don't carry it than the negative of finding out that I do.
It wasn't until we started talking to other people, family, friends, that we even realized, of course, there's the alternative to not get tested.
That never would have occurred to us.
Yeah.
I think we both were immediately, we have to know. There's a 50% chance we can just forget about this and never worry about it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or there's a 50% chance we could at least know and not be wondering.
Right. I think our feeling was, the question has now been raised, and nothing's going to make that go away. We could choose to answer it or we could choose not to answer it, but we'll have this question with us for as long as we live.
I left San Francisco knowing they wouldn't have my results for at least a few weeks, so I packed for my next trip. I'm leaving for DC tomorrow, so that'll be the CJD conference that's put on by the CJD Foundation.
The conference, this is the 12th year. It's always held in Washington, D.C.
Here we are, day one conference.
We realized there was a need to bring families together face to face and for them to be able to hear the research coming from the researchers.
They put together a conference so that families can meet, they can do group therapy sessions, group counseling, they can learn about the breakthroughs and interact with each other. But what they value most of all is they call it a safe space.
We've got a lot of fragile people showing up. We, one year, had a man who had lost his wife 2 weeks before the conference. So I was awed by his bravery. And, many people come alone, which again, how brave are these people? They've been through hell and now are just coming out the other side and are intrigued and interested enough to want to learn about this awful disease that changed their lives.
Because with the disease, there's not that many people that understand, because there's not a lot of groups out there and there's not enough awareness of it, so you don't know where to go. So this is a place for families and those affected to go and meet and grieve and learn and heal and all those things that need to happen.
Seriously emotional. We've had researchers break down in tears. A lot of families do the same, but that tells you the heart and soul of the work that's being done. And the families come not knowing what to expect or not knowing what emotional reaction they might have. And I say this every year because it's true. When I stand up to give my welcome first thing on Saturday morning, it's an experience that it's overwhelming, it's palpable, it's physical, because here I am in a room filled with people who've experienced exactly what I have. They know how I feel, and I don't have to explain. My heart was broken.
The conference was unbelievable. I've never been to anything like that before. An overwealth of information, so mind-boggling. I sat at a table and there was 2 other ladies that lost their husband the same time frame that I lost John. One was 3 days later, the other one was a week later. Same time frame on the diagnosis. It's just, you know, when you're out there, you think it's only you.
As a foundation, we were instrumental in being used as a template for sister organizations around the world. And so our work is being done all around the world. We get calls on our helpline from many, many countries. China, India, or Mexico, South America, countries. We can refer them to a list of physicians that we've developed around the world or to one of our sister organizations, and they in turn do the same thing. We also work very hard political advocacy. We go up on Capitol Hill 2 to 3 times a year to talk about what prion diseases are, how important they are in the surveillance of prion diseases to see whether any new diseases are developing, which they have. So we ask for money from Congress to go to the CDC to filter into the research world, especially the surveillance center.
The National Prion Disease Pathology Surveillance Center was actually established by the Centers for Disease Control in collaboration with the American Association of Neuropathologists back in the 90s, with the goal of facilitating neuropathology for suspected or diagnosed cases of prion disease. And so this center, in essence, serves to confirm these diseases. There is no dedicated prion lab here on the CDC campus, so we work very closely with the National Prion Center for disease confirmation.
CJD is not a nationally reportable disease. It's not. So it's not mandated in every state that you report CJD, and Texas is one of the states that does.
This is the only surveillance center in the United States in Cleveland. We only have one to cover 50 states.
It's always important to talk about the need for congressional funding, because if the CDC money doesn't get put into the hopper here, then the surveillance center doesn't get funded.
I guess the thing I'm looking forward to the most is Monday when we storm the Capitol Hill.
How intimidating is it to be an American citizen and be going to Capitol Hill to actually meet with your congressional representative, Congress and Senate? Oh my gosh, talk about intimidation. We don't meet with the members. Occasionally we do, but the staffers are really the ones you want to meet with, because they're the ones taking notes and talking about it with their members.
First meeting of the day is with Barbara Boxer's staff, Emily Katz. So here with Michelle and Gary and Betty. So we gotta get going soon. We're here.
We're on Capitol Hill to keep research funds for our disease and everything like that. So that's a far cry from Indiana, let me tell you.
We have a meeting at 10, and our plan is to try to make sure that we get our funding for the National Prion Disease Surveillance Center. It's an important center because it's our last defense for detecting prion diseases.
Very good. First time actually on Capitol Hill. Been around it. It's kind of exciting. They're quick visits. I know that because they're lined up basically every hour. So I think we just have a small group that gets to come in and says, make sure you provide funding so that we can keep researching and you know, fight the fight. Where are we, Michelle?
Boxer's office.
So quiet. All right. We're in the waiting room waiting for our meeting with Senator Boxer. Very exciting.
So we're going to meet with Emily Katz, she's obviously staff of Senator Barbara Boxer. I don't know exactly her title. She's
I didn't see anything. Yeah.
So I guess we can ask that. She's either a legislative correspondent or legislative director or staff assistant. So
yeah. And I saw that she likes Seinfeld, so in case I could get some.
How did you?
I looked her up on Facebook. The suggestion yesterday was to look them up on Facebook to get a little info on them.
Okay.
And so I did. Saw Emily Katz, but I think they've gotten savvy to that, and they don't have a lot of public info on their pages. They probably know, but I saw she had a Festivus so I was like, oh, Seinfeld, all right.
Festivus.
Yes, exactly. I chose not to record the meetings because it might be distracting. I wasn't there to make a movie. We were delivering a message. We need the National Prion Disease Pathology Surveillance Center, and Congress needs to ensure its funding.
The Appropriations Subcommittee is where the rubber hits the road, seriously. So it's important for our families to go to their representatives because they may not serve on a committee that has the deciding vote on the funding, but they are part of the voting body as a whole. So because we're small, we can only target and spend 1 or 2 days on Capitol Hill, but our families really make a difference. It's just amazing.
We're in the Rayburn building.
Who are we going to see?
Maxine Waters.
Maxine Waters has written legislation for Alzheimer's and Alzheimer's care and patient rights and things like that. If I can get her to expand her view a little bit beyond just Alzheimer's, which is what I wrote to her, that she can be a big advocate. Senator Feinstein has written me back already. She is a big proponent of healthcare and healthcare issues. Senator Feinstein is on one of the committees that oversees budgetary funding for the National Institute of Health, NIH, which is the one who provides the federal grants to UCSF so that they can do their research. Their research is a combination of federal funding and then private donations. Federal funding is restricted on what they can do. Obviously, if it's private donations, they can use it however they need to, but there's more oversight when it's the federal funds. Since I voted for each of the 2 senators and the 1 congressional representative, it's about time they did something for me, a constituent. So at least they're gonna listen. I've written every single one of them a letter explaining, why I'm an advocate for the research and the funding. So hopefully they can actually put a face and a name together on my end, which would be kind of cool.
It kind of makes you know that these are human beings. It's not Congress. It's made up of people. Some care, some don't care, some are stars. And we've been fortunate. We have good friends.
Walk. When John died, I said, we're going to have a walk next year, and we're going to raise money and awareness for CJD.
Many families have wanted to raise money. They want to do something to make a difference. So many years ago, we started out with one family offering a small research grant through the foundation. And the fundraising efforts of families are remarkable because there's passion. This is their donation and their gift to their loved one.
Welcome to our first annual Hunt for a Cure CJD in memory of John Fansler
As you guys know, that CJD is a fatal neurological brain disease in which there's no treatment or cure. That's why we're out here today. It's going to be a celebration. We're not going to cry. We're going to turn our negative grief into positive energy. We're going to be out here to celebrate. We're raising money to get a research grant.
We have research grants, and those are named for the loved one, the family member who is donating the money. They are asked to give $10,000.
If we would raise $10,000, the CJD Foundation would match us $10,000.
They can do it either over a period of 4 years, or do it in 2 years, or just give it all at one time. But once you've established that with the first check, we match it, or we clump research grants together and we give out a significant award. So last year it was 4 awards at $40,000 each.
We did it. We did it. I'm happy. I'm elated. We did it. We got the grant. We got the grant. It's unofficial, but we got the grant. We did what we set out to do. We raised over $10,000. All right, everybody all together. 1, 2, 3. This is not where it is till we see them again. Love you, baby. Would I would take anything to have John back, to pick him up out of the recliner and put him in a wheelchair? Yeah. Would he want to be that way? No. So I know he's happy. He sends me signs, but at the same time, I got to go out and raise awareness. We got to raise awareness. The doctors aren't doing it, so who's left to do it? Us. We're left.
I released 2 balloons, one for my grandfather and one for my mom. Raising awareness is the major reason for doing this documentary. Awareness not only for families, but for the medical community as well.
I think the biggest thing is awareness. You know, doctors aren't thinking of prion disease. They're not going to diagnose prion disease.
What we discovered in our work is that medical schools teach neurologists or their students, the residents, about creutzfeldt-jakob disease and prion diseases, and maybe, you know, one lecture at one moment in time. And then, and I'm generalizing because this is not always the case, they may see a patient and not recognize the disease because this is very hard to diagnose. And it presents as, it could be a number of diseases. And truthfully, this is the last thing that a neurologist wants to diagnose.
Since this is a very rare disease, there's very little opportunity to get research done.
But it's an exciting area of science. It's a tough area of science. It's unrealistic to tell people that it's not a tough area of science.
I am not even close to being a scientist. So when Sonia and Eric told me their story, I was in awe. But I also understood, if you aren't willing to help yourself, then who will?
So the story that brings us into the prion field starts in 2010, when we were on very different life trajectories. We had moved to Boston together so that Eric could go to school for city planning and I went to law school. And as those enterprises were wrapping up and we were jumping into jobs, my mom had just gotten like rapidly ill. But it was in October of 2011 that we learned from my dad that the results had come back and that it was a prion disease, but it was actually a genetic form of prion disease called fatal familial insomnia.
Fatal familial insomnia, or FFI, was most notably described in the book The Family That Couldn't Sleep by D.T. Max.
I didn't have like a vision that I was changing careers. Definitely not. If anything, I thought like, this is like an odd moment where I need to take sort of a step back and gather this information because I seemed compelled to do that. And the two of us are gonna need to be like savvy consumers of scientific information for the rest of our lives. And we can't really count on sort of like our point people in the medical establishment to know much about prion disease. This is where it comes into play that we are just like extraordinarily lucky to live in Cambridge, Mass. I would like walk down the street to MIT and like walk up the front steps and go to class. And I walked into a lot of lectures where I don't think I looked significantly older than like the average person in the room, and so I would just like hang out in the back and like no one stopped me. I also went to seminars and smaller classes on molecular basis of human disease and genetics and protein misfolding.
Meanwhile, during all this, I'd studied city planning. I was kind of doing computational stuff, and I was in a job in a consulting firm where I was mostly writing software. So I figured, is there some way I can apply this skill set to biology and genetics? Starting out from a place of maybe remembering 25% of high school biology. So enrolled in a night class at Harvard Extension School, was learning some bioinformatics, did a little end of semester project, ended up sort of deciding to go on the job market. And it was a harder decision for me than Sonia, I think, because I actually really liked the job that I was in.
With all due respect to my colleagues with my hair color, often it's the young people who say, why is it that way? That makes things move forward. And so one of the things that we try to do as much as we can is make sure that that the young people get lots of opportunity to get involved and exposed to the international community also. And those are often the people who can sort of lead you down a way that you hadn't thought about. That's a very positive thing in science.
So in 2012, as we were changing careers, we also started a nonprofit called Prion Alliance, which has a scientific and research focus, and the goal is really to fundraise to support research and otherwise facilitate research towards prion therapeutics.
Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are universal scourges of fairly large numbers. Creutzfeldt-jakob disease is a universal scourge too. I hate to say it, but it just doesn't attract as much interest because it's unfortunately not as, doesn't affect people like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and some of these other diseases does. But they're going to learn from us.
It's hard to find good information about prion disease. And so it seemed like having our own website and blogging was maybe the best way to get some good information out there to people. But the main goal of Prion Alliance is and always has been to fund research. And to the extent that we can, to catalyze research too, to convince people to make things more open, more collaborative, share things more freely.
At the moment, my lab has two major international collaborations. One is with another laboratory in Cleveland at Case Western Reserve University, where we think we found some sort of protective mechanism in the brain that's triggered by prion disease. We didn't really know it was there before, but with some of these special analytical techniques, we found out that something's going on we didn't.
The research community that works on prion diseases is really a vast international web. Very few people do these things alone. The diseases are too complex, too difficult for individuals to just kind of do their own thing. Individuals have some really good ideas, but in order to tackle some of these rather complex questions, you often get many people kind of taking a piece of the problem, contributing the expertise that they have.
There's a lot of potential for treatments. There's a lot of potential for new diagnostic tests and advancement in science, which ultimately should help us find ways of helping patients who get these type of diseases.
If we're underestimating the numbers of people who stand to benefit, then we're not putting our best foot forward to make a case for researchers' time and the government's money and all of these things to be put into this cause.
These are extremely difficult problems in biology. They're not easy. If they'd been easy, they've been solved long ago. And so every new way that we could look at them is a really positive thing.
So we think we're in the right area. We've got to drill down a bit more to understand that. But these links, it could literally switch you from something good, stopping the disease, to something that's not going to stop the disease.
It's been a year since that first meeting with Dr. Geschwin, and I've learned a lot about prion disease, but I still have one question that I need to get an answer to. I'm in San Francisco. Today's the day. I will find out at 3 o'clock today. And waiting will be over, at least I'll know, which has been the whole purpose. My goal throughout this journey is to learn and then to find out. So we're almost there. This is the final chapter. All right, so I'm on campus now. Got about an hour until I find out, get the results. It's the building right over there. Luckily, my dad and stepmom are here, giving me support. I want to know. I know that I want to know. I've had so many discussions about whether or not I need to know, and I do need to know. So today's the day. I'll be talking with Dr. Geschwin again. And I either get some really great news or, honestly, the thing that I've been expecting. I've been expecting the positive results, which is the opposite of what it sounds like, but that's how medicine is. That's a big part of finding out right now. It's just so I can get going. I don't have to wait anymore, wondering. Because wondering's the hardest part. I've been nauseous the last couple days. Luckily, I got some great people supporting me, and it's been a crazy journey. It's been almost exactly a year since I came here this first time. And now I get to find out.
Well, so the point of this visit, obviously, is for you to get your genetic results. And we're going to open up the envelope, and we're going to find out at the same time what your results are.
By the way, I was telling them how you make me feel so comfortable about this, and you know, it just makes the whole thing a lot easier, because I want to know, you know, that's the whole thing. I want to know, and hearing it from somebody that I respect and trust, and you know, puts me at ease. So that's.
I'm glad to hear that. You know, it's hard for anybody sitting here and on both sides. I think we're ready to open the envelope if you're ready.
I have been ready for a while, so.
So you do have the mutation, the E200K, unfortunately, and it's 129V. So that means you have a somewhat unusual, there are very few people who have E200K with V on the same chromosome. That's a much smaller population than E200K with an M.